Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? Welcome to part two of our Law and Disorder mini series that we're just starting to run here at What's Up Canada. And we wanted to do something specifically to highlight the what it's like for officers dealing with the upside down craziness that is going on in Canada. And it's a difficult situation these officers find themselves in, but more and more of them are being forced into doing things that they would never have imagined themselves being put in a position to do. So in these troubled times, and with the trust that has been lost between the average John Q public and the governing forces, we wanted to do something to rebuild the trust and let people know that there are people out there that are doing what's right, not what's easy. So this gives us an opportunity to meet and speak with amazing gentlemen like Mr. James Erskine. For those of you guys that don't know James's story, this will be the first time he'll be out publicly telling what's been going on and what brought him to us, our little chat discussion here. James, is as unfortunate as it is to meet under these circumstances. It's good to see you again. Thanks for taking the time to join us and share.
Well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
It's well, thank you for being so gracious, but I'm sure there's other places that would make you happier to be. And it's strange how the people we meet when times change, and ordinarily you and I probably never would have ever crossed paths in our lifetime.
Yep.
But we find ourselves in a situation here where people like us have the opportunity to meet and discuss and talk about different things. No offense to you, but ordinarily most of my life I probably would have gone left seeing an officer coming from the right. But
sure,
I'm incredibly honored to get a chance to speak and talk to you guys. So tell us a little bit about where you're at and
sure.
your story leading up to where we first met a little bit. You're not just a rookie on the force.
No, I've been a cop for 11 years, nearly 11 years. My February would have been my 11th anniversary, and so I've policed in Winnipeg for that entire time. Leading up to this, I've done a few different things as a police officer. Most of my time has been in patrol, so I've basically been riding around in a car taking calls. I've also done a stint in major crimes as a plainclothes constable or detective. I found, I really enjoyed. I've enjoyed all of my time as a police officer up until more recently, and that hasn't been the job itself. It's been, a lot of the stuff that's surrounding the job these days. But essentially, I've over the last couple of years, it's really started taking a toll. Some of the things that are going on, some of the things we're being asked to do, and it sort of came to a head where, personally, I'd been in a little bit of trouble at work for speaking out about some of the things, whether it was masking or whether it was giving tickets to families for meeting for. Go ahead.
If you don't mind me interrupting, when
Sure.
did you start to feel or sense or know that something wasn't right? Like you mentioned, a couple of years. So this. You have an inquisitive mind. You've been an investigator. What was it, and when did you start to notice that things weren't as they should be, or maybe even flat out gone off the rails?
Well, it's interesting. We were actually in my family and I went to Texas in early 2020, I guess, and there was some. There was all this talk about this new virus, and there was all this chatter, and at the time you don't necessarily know what's going on, and you kind of take everything at face value, and it didn't take very long into sort of the news cycles before I started thinking, well, there's something odd going on here. It's you've got these stories that are coming out, and they're not quite adding up, and then the answer started being to keep people apart, wear a mask. It just taking the totality of the circumstances all into account, I just, something was off to me. And I've spent a lot of time in interview rooms, and I've spent a lot of time just talking to people and getting a story straight. And one of the things that was always taught to me in academy, one of the best pieces of advice I had ever heard was, if you're trying to find out the truth, you just keep asking questions until things start making sense. And when you're hearing lies, they're not going to make sense. And it's one of the best ways to I guess triage the information that's coming in. It doesn't make rational sense. And there's been so much nonsense and foolishness that has surrounded this entire quote unquote pandemic that is absolute. It just doesn't pass the smell test. And so it wasn't very long into all of it where I started rolling my eyes when we're getting sent into these downtown rooming houses where you're stepping into all kinds of filth, all over the floor and the ground, and needles and drugs and all this stuff. And the big thing that you're being told to worry about is whether or not somebody's got a mask on. And I'm going, well, like tuberculosis is rampant here in Winnipeg, and we've got, a fentanyl problem, and, which ironically is one of the things that I think a mask is actually useful for in policing. But it didn't take very long for me to sort of look at it at face value.
Looking then, there's a difference between noticing that something's off, and then when did you start looking? Because you're a cop. You've got to look.
Yeah.
Don't tell you. I can't
Sure.
believe that you're not. You're not going to start looking.
Well, I've probably gone down a lot of the same rabbit holes that a lot of people have who have started looking. And again, you've got to triage that information. I always think about it. I watch a lot of YouTube, and I watch YouTube because although I don't agree with a lot of their corporate policies, the amount of information on there, if you want to fix your car, you can look up, a 2012 Chevy and figure out, where the oil is to check and all this stuff. And you can figure out how to do your ball joints and all this. There's an infinite amount of free information on YouTube. And the key when you're watching things like that is to be able to if you watch 3 or 4 different videos about the same thing, you're going to realize pretty quickly that there's 1 or 2 that are more credible than the others. And, you'll realize pretty quickly that maybe somebody's just spouting off the same thing that they've heard in an effort to get views. And so what you tend to do just naturally is go through that. And we've been kind of told in our day and age that everybody's opinion matters. And I suppose that's true in a certain sense, but you also have to be able to look at it and say some people's opinion might matter a little bit more, and some people's opinion might be, well, some people's opinion is more accurate to the actual truth. And so you have to be able to walk through those different people giving you advice and pick out of their what is the stuff you're going to listen to. And so when I started seeing doctors who are getting wiped off of YouTube, I'm thinking, this isn't normal behavior in a free and democratic society. It's not normal behavior for people who actually want to know an answer to an actual question. Even when we, like, let's say I arrest somebody, I've arrested near 650 people or something like that in my career. And not all of them am I doing a detailed interview with, but let's say I've arrested somebody based on their appearance in a surveillance video, and then I bring them in, and I, you get up close, and this has happened to me where this is the
Sorry about that. I hope that wasn't too disrupting.
Sorry about that. You broke up a minute there. But if I'm arresting somebody based on their appearance and I go into an interview and an investigation and suddenly new information comes to light, I have to go with that new information, whether I like it or not. And I've been embarrassed in my career to have arrested the wrong person. It doesn't happen often. It's happened, a small handful of times, but as you arrest the wrong person and immediately upon realizing that, you have to apologize, even though you wouldn't necessarily have changed anything about your methods prior to that. You would have done the same things again because you honestly believed at that point in time that you were arresting them that it was the right person. And guess what? Every person that you arrest tells you that you've got the wrong person, and you don't necessarily believe them off the bat. But as soon as there's new information there, you have to accept that as at face value. And I just, when you see doctors who are experts in virology and experts in their different fields speaking to these matters from their expert point of views, and then being silenced, whether it's through coercion or intimidation or just being deleted off of the internet, it makes you think, well, there's something going on here, and I think that's where I am right now. I would have a lot easier of a time believing that that the folks who say that they're out there for our best interests are out for our best interests if there wasn't so much cloak and daggery going on. And that's the way that I see what's happening right now.
And so when did things start getting hard at work? I'm sure you weren't alone in your thinking, but you sure had to have felt alone. And
Sure.
This is something that I hear from now several officers that I've spoken to in the last few weeks.
Well, it's a difficult thing. I mean, the policing community is a tight-knit group, and I mean, I like to think that after 11 years, for the most part, the folks that I've worked with I've held their respect to one degree or another. I'm not the be all end all of a police officer. I'm not perfect, and I'm not the best cop out there. But I'm also no slouch, and I'm a hard worker, and I think that on the shifts that I've been on and the supervisors that I've had in general, I've carried some amount of respect. And I think the hardest thing, and I see this across all different professions that I interact with, is that these people that you may have worked with for a decade, suddenly there's this change to them, and there's sort of a distrust that breeds, and it's not necessarily based on fact. It's based on opinion, public opinion of somebody who isn't playing the same song that everybody else is playing. So that's been very difficult, and I think that it really culminated in the past month or two. And I'm a relatively stubborn fella, and I'm one of the few who I couldn't see myself going back to working under the circumstances that they've now installed in the police service. So we were, I mean, we're always going into public places. In Manitoba, we've had masking rules for months and months, more than a year actually, and so we've had that. But really, when we're going into a private residence, who knows what these rules, the way they change constantly. But for the most part, you're able to get along. You go into your car, you put on a mask when you need to, you just go and do your job. And for the entire time, ironically, that the state of emergency was in effect, that was just the status quo. Is that you wear a mask when you need to. Some people would wear them all the time, but very, very few. Cops aren't really they're not really an afraid type for the most part. So, when you're going to a call with a guy with a knife who's, out of his mind on meth, you're not really worried about whether or not he's got a cough, right? And and so we would act that way, and in the last week or two, it's gotten really bad. Since about the 15th of November, we had a deadline where we had to either declare our status and upload a QR code to Human Resources, or if we weren't willing to do that, they implemented a big procedure. And the way that they implemented the procedure was basically they made it as difficult as possible to just go to work and do your job. So in the police stations, in the cars, in the day-to-day interactions with people, either on their front doorstep or in their living room, a lot of us were able to carry on without, we're not wearing a mask for 10 hours next to the guy beside us. We're not wearing a mask in the police station. And that's still the case for most of the officers who have uploaded their QR code. But what they've done now is they've split the workforce into sort of an us versus them, and they've taken and it's clearly and intentionally designed to make things as difficult as possible, and it's designed to intimidate and coerce somebody to go and do the thing that they're trying to get you to do and upload a QR code of some sort. And so we're having to do testing 3 times a week. I shouldn't say we. I'm not. The reason I resigned is I refused to do that, and there was no leeway. There was no talking to anybody about it. But my cohorts, they're testing 3 times a week. They have to do that on their own time. They have to do that at least one of those tests off-site. They have to do those. They have to upload a photo of their test on their own time onto the system. Then when they come in, from the moment they walk through the doors to the moment they leave, including all of the time in the cruiser car, including all of the time in the open air outside, they're having to wear a mask, despite all of their coworkers being free to live and breathe and carry on business. Right. I had a really good friend of mine who got in a lot of trouble recently because he was drinking a Slurpee and had his mask down, taking sips of his Slurpee, and somebody came around and just let him have it. And this is in a room where there's 15 people who aren't masked, but he's the one who gets, and ironically, he's the only one who's testing regularly, of course, right? It's just the stupidity of it is boundless.
And it's beyond stupid. It's absurd. It is absolutely absurd.
It's absurdity, yeah. And it's criminal.
Well, and we'll get to that absolutely yet. But you brought up something that I wanted to address, was this us versus them mindset. That so this is significant in that this is affecting all of Canada. Everybody is being divided into this us versus them society. Yep. And it's one thing if me and my neighbor disagree on these kinds of things. It's us versus them. This is a personal disagreement. There is no cost to the community or hazard to life. But when they are doing this to police services and emergency personnel, this is a different story. There is a price to pay for this kind of absurdity. So at what point did you start, or and maybe you can tell me if this is even the case, but I'm sure there had to be a noticeable shift in your thought, time spent, what you're doing every single day was no longer on policing, but was on the politics of the us versus them and the absurdities.
And not just, really not just the average police officer who's not following this regiment of QR codes, but really when you think about it, the amount of time and effort that the entire command or organization structure is putting into making sure, like when the inspector is taking time out of his day to drag people in over and over again. Hey, you weren't wearing, for these 35 seconds here, you weren't wearing your mask. They're pulling cameras right now because somebody, somebody went through the hall and some said, well, that wasn't wearing his mask walking down the hall, and of course do I still have you there? I'm coming up.
Yeah, I'm still here. We might be getting a little bit of a glitch.
Oh, I got a little buffer there. Yeah, I don't know if I lost you there, but they're pulling cameras now and doing essentially like investigations that you would rarely do on thefts or that kind of thing for a chocolate bar. They're pulling cameras about because somebody says, well, this cop came in and wasn't wearing a mask, and sure enough, they pulled a stupid video, and the cop said, no, I was. They pulled a video, and sure enough, he was. And it's this embarrassing, weird, upside down world that we've entered, where the time being spent is about if this mask is up or down versus we've got this insane meth crisis here in Winnipeg. We've got people who are depressed and committing suicide. We've got all kinds of problems that are legitimate, serious problems in Winnipeg. Like Winnipeg is a high crime city, and what is our commanding officers doing? They're worrying about how many masks this cop has got on, and is it the blue one or is it the black one? Is it the one that came out of this box or out of that box? And hold on a second, you just sneezed. Yeah, but I just tested 4 times. How we've got cops who are coming in coughing and hacking all over the place, but they've uploaded their QR code, and sure enough, it comes back that they're positive for COVID, whatever the hell that means. And it's this Rubicon that we've crossed where I look at it and I think, like, this is not what I signed up for. This is absolute nonsense. I'm here to go and get bad guys, and I'm pretty damn good at getting them. Like I'm good at finding bad guys, and I'm good at arresting them, and that's what I'm here to do. And you just come to this point where they realize you realize that those guys who are running the show here aren't interested in those things. They're interested in whatever their next appointment is, whether it's climbing the ladder within the hierarchy of the Winnipeg Police or the firefighters or the medics or any of these structures, right? They're looking for their next, the next throat that they can step on to get up higher up the ladder, and it's nonsense.
This was something that I came up in a discussion the other day with Vincent Gerses as well. Is the the good cops, the ones that are out there literally catching bad guys. I'm seeing videos of them being reduced to arresting moms at hockey rinks because they're not wearing a mask, and I look at that and at first I'm absolutely appalled at that, but then I feel sympathy for that cop because he's being forced to do something that he knows is absolutely wrong, and he has got to be absolutely ashamed of himself in that moment, and lost as to what an option is for him when from above this nonsense is what is forcing him to do that. I can only imagine how handcuffed these officers might be, and so what does that do to your force? Your community. I mean, I was never a cop, but I went through military training, and I know how important that camaraderie, that dependence, you need to be able to depend on each other. But then you're dealing with this kind of stuff. How do you do that and go to work with a partner that you have a differentiating view of what you're willing to do in the name of your boss or not? Yeah,
I honestly don't know how that's all going to unfold. I don't think that it's going to unfold well. I've worked with some of these folks for 10 and 11 years since I first started, since I was a recruit on the street, and a lot of them have my respect. I've worked, and one thing I want to say too is that I think there's a responsibility on our part too, we who are on this side of the coin, to do our best to make sure that the us versus them doesn't become rooted and doesn't become firmly established. The tendency and my initial reaction to all of this stuff is anger, and it's frustration, and it's wanting somebody to receive the same measure as they're doling out to me or to my coworkers or my cohorts. And I think, one of the things you talked to with Vincent when you were speaking to him, Mr. Gerses, was about just the tendency towards violence and the idea that that's not, it's not an answer and it's not a solution. And despite being now on this side of the coin, this side of what I would call discrimination, I think there's a tendency there when you're discriminated against and spoken of as lesser than others to want to lash back out at people. And I became a cop because I don't think that that's the right answer. And I still struggle with it. I still struggle with anger, and I still struggle with wanting somebody's comeuppance to arrive, right? But I think the answer to all of this is to build a community that is parallel but better than the community that's being built by these so-called leaders of ours. One of the things we were speaking very briefly before coming live here, you and I, was how your community is just that. It's a community more than an audience, and it's excuse me. It's a it's a group where people really help one another and really are for one another and for building rather than sort of destroying. And I think that that's the attitude to have here. We're looking at a snake that's chasing its tail, and it's in fact caught its tail, and all it's doing is it's devouring itself. It's chewing on its back end, right? And this is a house of cards, and the system that we have in Canada in general has been a house of cards for quite some time now. And what we're looking at is they're flicking cards out from the bottom of this pile, and the game that they're playing is only a game as long as they're as long as they can keep that stack of cards upright. It's going to fall eventually, and you can't have this kind of quote unquote leadership for any length of time without this all falling apart. And you just kind of have to step back in a certain sense. You can't just. There's certain things that you have to do. You have to hold people to account. I'm not saying that you just don't sit back and do nothing. I just mean that. Are we ever going to arrest Trudeau for his crimes? I doubt it. Are we ever going to get to a point where, any of these chiefs of police are held to account for the ridiculous things they're doing? I doubt it. And would it be nice to see that? Absolutely. But in the meantime, while a lot of us are tempted to be sitting there shaking our fists, we're also wasting valuable time for actually just ignoring these fools and starting our own system and our own communities where we don't behave that way towards one another. And I think that's the real way out of this.
I tend to agree with you on that, and from my position in all of this, I see a lot of that happening in coast to coast already, where people have just had enough, and they'll just go and rebuild it in a way that works. Canadians are not typically ones to sit on their hands, and we're seeing those people, those good people that want to invest in their communities, because that's ultimately what community is people that are willing to invest in themselves for a better future. And this is not what we're seeing from leadership in any way, shape, or form, not in policing, not in healthcare, not in communities, not in politics, not in any way, shape, or form. And I like to say that insanity is unsustainable. And I think that we're in the window of seeing that exact collapse, because begetting a lie will never ever end in the truth. And we live in a society that ultimately we hear a lot about reconciliation, and reconciliation means post justice. That means peace after justice. And at some
Yes.
point, this is going to have to be a discussion. I think that's going to have to be had because there's just too much gone too far,
Yes.
too sideways. And it's you kind of probably answered some of the questions for the community already. Is, are we ever going to see Trudeau arrested? Are we ever going to see some of these people arrested? I kind of hope that at some day, a little more hope than you do, that we might. But at the end of the day, people are starting to understand more and more that rules and laws are, or laws or rules agreed upon by a small number of people and then enforced upon a population. And at any point in time, the court of public opinion can adjourn and replace those people, that small group of people that make those rules, that create the laws, and we will see a turnaround in all of that. So these are some of the things that encourage me moving forward, but also this trepidation about the violence. And this is something that I really want to talk about here for a couple of minutes. Is you brought this up earlier because before the show, about Vincent and I talking about this, we're seeing people pushed to their limits.
Yes.
And that emotional outburst can be incredibly costly in a moment of an emotional outburst, because people are pushed to their limits. And this is what makes me afraid every single day when I wake up, is who's going to have had enough today? Is this going to happen? So we want to do a lot of talking about expressing your anger. Yes. But expression is, I see it as I'm not really religious, but I believe in, a God, and that I'm, was given this voice and this mouth to use it. And expression is something that cannot be taken away from us. If we stop that expression, that's where dangerous things happen. That's where emotions get out of control. So I really want to encourage people to be angry, express your anger, but in a reasonable, peaceful, respectful way. That is how we will create a community on the other side on that. How is this something that's on your mind a lot these days, James?
It is, and it's interesting that you say that, especially because I think that during my entire time speaking out against this internally in our service, I've sent some pretty hotly worded emails, but there's never been, I've never been yelling, I've never been screaming or banging my fists on tables or anything like that. I absolutely have looked superior officers in the eye and said, this is wrong, what you're doing is wrong. And that's a difficult thing. I do respect rank, and I do respect I respect an officer who's been there for 25, 30 years and who's climbed the ladder and that kind of thing. But you also have to, you have to be able to articulate what's right. And if you can, and that's another thing that I really appreciated about what Vincent Gersey said, was he went through somewhat systematically the ways in which the laws in our country work. Excuse me. And one thing that I think is that if you've got it in your mind that this is wrong, you don't necessarily have to know all of the details about why it's wrong. And when you, what I mean by that is you don't have to necessarily be able to quote, the criminal code offense or the section of the Charter of Rights that this is breaching. The reason that things like the Charter of Rights and laws in general exist is because people are prone to doing the wrong thing. People are prone to breaking laws. People are prone to acting poorly towards one another, whether that is because of monetary gain or because they're angry or because any number of different reasons. But the reason that we have the laws that we have in Canada isn't just an arbitrary thing. They've been put there in place because people have done so many wrong things in the past. It's not the other way around. It's not that we make up rules and now you're a criminal. Although some of the things, some of the laws that have been made recently are a little arbitrary, but I'm talking the basic, do unto others kind of laws, right? Your assaults and your intimidations and your robberies and your, all of these things. Stealing from somebody is wrong, and those are wrong not because they're in the criminal code. It's in the criminal code because it's wrong. And so to get back to your question about how to articulate yourself, I think it's very important that your point always comes across better when you're calm and when you're articulate. And the people that I've dealt with on the street, who you knock on the door flings open, and then you're being screamed at. Like, it typically doesn't go well for that person, right? At some point in time, they run out and they're waving their hands and they're screaming and they're drunk, and guess what? They end up in the drunk tank, right? And when you sit down, even if there's been some serious crime that's happened, when you sit down and that person is willing to speak and willing to explain their side of things, often what happens is that the truth comes out better, and instead of it being clouded with everybody's emotion and everybody's immediate investment in that current scenario, just dealing with the facts speaks for itself. And so I think that's the way that people really have to keep going here. Now, there's a caveat there where certain people don't think rationally, and whatever. I think there's a place for people like that, where they think with their hearts. There's a place with good-hearted, kind people, and even if they don't necessarily always do the right thing rationally, their heart's always in the right place, and so you kind of have to deliver a message a little bit differently to those kind of people as well, where you appeal to their sense of why this is wrong and who it damages, right? Just telling some people facts is going to shut their brains off, and that's the difficult truth about it, and probably folks like me for sure, and probably folks like you who are journalists and that kind of thing. You look at the facts, and you look at it's very simple for me to put it together, like A, B, and C, and we arrive at D. And there's a lot of people who just when they hear that grandma might be gotten by the boogeyman virus, or they hear that their kids won't be able to play hockey or soccer, they're going to go and act out of that emotion. They think, and then when they're told that a guy like me is the reason that their kids can't play hockey, instead of thinking about that and thinking through that and rationalizing it, they just get angry. And so it really and it can happen on our side of things too, right? Where instead of looking at that person who's got that dirty look for you in the hallway, kill them with kindness, and be above the same techniques that they're using to demonize people who have made a different decision. And I think that's one of the critical things here when it comes to dealing with people who are of totally different opinions than we are.
Well, there's so many different trades and things that and science included. It depends on questions. It's only viable if it's questioned. It must be questioned. Investigations must be questioned. Being a journalist is, without a badge and a weapon, it's the same. A lot of the same work as cops are doing, and it's asking questions. And I don't care where the answers lead, good, bad, or otherwise. But when I'm told I cannot have the discussion or I cannot ask the question,
Yep.
that's when there's going to be a problem. That's that's when you're going to start to hear articulation from me. So this,
Yep.
it's a similar mindset. I'm not comparing it any stretch of the imagination, but that's
But it is very similar. It is very similar, and the idea of a journalist simply repeating a talking point because that's what their boss tells them to say. CBC gets out there and they've been bought and paid for by the Liberal government, and the government in general, and them just putting out the story that comes from above is the equivalent of a cop going and just arresting somebody based on on their sergeant saying you got to arrest that person. Okay, that goes so far for me. And when you're in a scenario on the street and everything's moving right now, and there's one patrol sergeant and there's 15 other cops, and there's a big group of people in a big crowd, and somebody goes arrest him and her. You listen to that, but then as soon as it's practical, you come back and say, okay, what are they under arrest for? Why are they under arrest? Let's debrief here. And if all of a sudden things don't add up, you've got to change your you can't just carry on and charge that person if it's not adding up, right? And it's the same thing with journalism. And really, you're 100% right. I've often said that a journalist should be doing essentially the same job as a cop, but your job is to talk about it to the public and not necessarily bring that person into the court for charges. But it's essentially the same thing. What are you looking for? You're looking for the truth. And if you actually really want to know the truth, you're going to look for it. And if you don't, and there's a bunch of different reasons why somebody wouldn't. One of the main reasons I think is laziness or just indifference. I think there's a lot of people who are just indifferent to what's going on. And so when somebody comes along and says, okay, we got to wear this mask, it'll be 2 weeks. Okay. And they do that. And then, 2 weeks go by and they say, it'll actually be another month. And they say, okay. And they go ahead. Right. And I think that person just doesn't necessarily have an inquisitive mind. And so there's a lot of people I think are just going about their lives. And you can't hold that against them, and you can't either shake them out of it. Like you can't sort of grab them and shake truth into people. I found that out the hard way. I've had a lot of difficulty with whether it's with family or friends or where I'm going. Look, you guys can't see what's going on here. You guys and then but then I'm coming across overly aggressive, and now that person isn't willing to listen because they just see that I'm angry about something, and so they stop seeing the reason and they just start seeing angry James who's frustrated about something. So
there's a lot of that mindset in our society, and I think it was Winston Churchill that said people will feed the alligator hoping that it eats them last, and that's exactly what we're seeing now. People will walk by that alligator and feed it because then it won't eat them. But what happens when you don't have any more food to feed that alligator? Well, then you've got a different story, and I think this is a lot of what we're seeing. And by that feeding the alligator, I mean the compliance to the nonsense, the compliance to the things that we know in our heart and souls are wrong. But then it's difficult as a society when you guys as cops are being weaponized to go and make these people look like criminals because they didn't do something that they knew was inherently, we're supposed to breathe. And yet they are now a criminal. And so this has created such a confusion and turmoil in the population that they are now looking to feed the alligator because they don't know what else to do to stay alive. That's kind of in a sense where they're at. And this is why I was so compelled to want to do an in-depth series with officers to show that you guys are as much being assaulted in this, and how you're being treated as a weapon by people that really have none of the ethical or moral or reasonable sense of what law and order is supposed to be anymore. It's kind of how I see it.
Well, I think there's also a little bit of a responsibility for certain people, and professions. I think that a cop really has to be able to think about right and wrong in the moment while they're making a decision, and that's very difficult. And I've changed quite a bit over my career in terms of my mindset for certain things. I was a fairly young man when I started. And so then, you're given sort of this gun and this badge and this car, and you're allowed to go fast, and you're allowed to, go and tell people what to do. And so you're there, you're 26 years old, and now you're talking to 40-year-olds and who can't keep their lives together, and you're telling them how to proceed and what to do and stand over here. And there's an aspect of that you have to kind of get over yourself, as you grow as a cop and that kind of thing. And I think that, naturally, there's a progression there when you're an honest cop. Like you kind of progress through the idea of, well, this is fun, to, well, this is very serious. And not that you don't, I'm not saying I didn't think of it as serious when I first started, but it's just, there's a deepening of your understanding, and there has to be for certain professions. And I mean, I look at a lot of these professions that are really, I guess, hard pressed under these circumstances, whether it's teachers, whether it's nurses or doctors. We've got an awesome group of firefighters and medics and cops that are all together that are working on this. And I've been speaking mostly as a police officer or a former police officer. There's a wonderful group of people who really look at this and who say they take their responsibility to care for people seriously. And when you really do that, when you look outside of this system of whatever law that you're enforcing, or whatever procedure that the fire service has, and you look outside of that procedure and you look at what's right and wrong, you become a far better professional. You're doing your job just that much better, because you're not worried about checking the right boxes. You're worried about doing the right thing for the person that you're serving. And of course, policing is an interesting thing, because often the person that you're dealing with, you're not necessarily serving them, so to speak. But at the same time, you have to be able to treat a prisoner with respect. And I've arrested people who've done some pretty heinous things, and I've had some very good partners. One of whom specifically really had this way that I paid attention to him, and he just, despite what that person was guilty of, or allegedly guilty of, he had this way of treating them with dignity. And of course there's a certain aspect of it being, when somebody's coming at you with a knife, you're not treating them with dignity, right? Like there's this weird balance. But I guess I'm getting into the weeds here. But all I'm saying is that these professions that deal with people, and serving the people, really have I think a higher expectation. The public has a higher expectation of them to really think through the things, and not just blindly follow whatever directive is being handed down to them. And so, I see a real hopefulness in a lot of the people that I've come into contact with as a result of some of these groups I'm a part of. I always joke when the police are getting along with the firefighters, and the city police are getting along with the Mounties over something, something's seriously wrong, because we always joke with one another, right? What is the joke for it? We got a stripe on the side of our pants, and so the firefighters always send us in. They call us the Blue Canaries, and if the line's like this, everything's fine. If it falls over, well, then they all back out, right? The firefighters always joke about that, and then cops always joke about the firefighters. But when we all come together and we all have a common goal, you can tell that there's something's going on, right? Like when you get that many people together, just like you said earlier, you and I may have never met, and here we were. One of my colleagues and I drove down. I think it was Thanksgiving weekend, Thanksgiving Sunday. We were bombing 2 hours out of the city just to meet you in southern Manitoba, and it's just such interesting circumstances that bring people together, right? And that's the really encouraging thing, right? Is
absolutely
learning to work together.
You mentioned something there that really resonated with me in these services and these people in these specific jobs. They hold themselves to a higher standard, and so does the public in a level of trust, because we've got very used to being able to having that privilege, and that was a privilege to have good officers, good people that actually genuinely cared, that held themselves to that higher power, that higher standard. It makes me chuckle when you talk about the competition level between the fire department and the police. I spent 15 years in fire and rescue as well myself, so I get it, and it's a friendly thing, but
sure.
It's very significant, as you say, when now that's not there anymore. It's coming together for a purpose that's outside of that candor of on the site. And the same thing with journalism. We're seeing exactly that. Journalists were and police were never they tolerated each other, but now we're seeing collaboration, and we're seeing these people stepping out of that older system and entering a new way of thinking in these alternate parallel communities. So we've only got 5 or 6 minutes left here, so this is a perfect segue into that, because these people that have these higher standards within them and connected to their community are starting these parallel societies, these parallel organizations, and these things that are so inspiring to me. You're doing a little bit of that as well. Tell us a little bit about that before we take off out of here, and before we do, we'll make sure that we get the people out there watching a way to follow you and keep in touch with you and some of what you're doing. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting that you say about journalists and police. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been approached on the street, and it, we kind of have a standard, we're not allowed to talk to journalists when we're on the road without specific approval, generally speaking. But B, there's an inherent distrust between a cop and a journalist in general, and I laugh because the one I've seen so many events that I've personally attended to, just ridiculously covered, but there does come a point where it's like you can weed out the ones who are honest and get after that, and I think that it's an awesome privilege to be here with somebody who I think is an honest journalist, and so what we're doing, myself and a group of some police and a group of some firefighters and medics, we've got Frontline Alliance Manitoba.ca, Frontline Alliance MB.ca. It's a group that we started. There've been quite a number of of groups and collaborations that have popped up as a result of a lot of the stuff that's going on. And without trying to muddy the waters, we're another one of them. One thing that we have that's a little bit of a I guess an edge of sorts. We're a number of serving and currently serving police officers, firefighters, paramedics. We're in Winnipeg. We've got I would say we're a little spoiled in a certain sense. I wouldn't. That's maybe not the best word to use, because I think it's still egregious the way that we're being treated. But a lot of workplaces, they're not giving employees even an option. They're saying you've got to upload a QR code. You've got to get double vax, triple vax now, and we've got a testing option. And I think I alluded to it a little earlier. To me, the testing option isn't really an option. It's a coercion method.
Absolutely. You can't exchange one experiment for another experiment and call it choice.
Exactly. But I do recognize, and I want to recognize the fact that I've seen that there's folks in a lot harder of a position than someone like me, and yet I think that we are intending to stand, because we believe that even that quote unquote alternative is egregious. It's especially with the way that it's rolled out. You're being treated as though you're lesser until you're willing to do the thing that whoever wants you to do, and when those things aren't given with full consent, informed consent, it's not an option, and it falls in my mind. It falls very directly under criminal code for intimidation. Section 143, I believe, subsection 1, subsection B, that you can't force somebody to do anything that they don't legally have to do through intimidation or through punishment. And you can't force somebody not to do something that they have the legal right to do. And I mean, you look at like wearing a mask, that's something that somebody has a legal right not to do. You've got the legal right to breathe freely. We've all learned that in high school, right? In grade school, we've learned that. So our organization is a group that's intending to take some of these measures to courts. We're intending to fight in court, bring this through the various steps that we've got to bring it through. We're dealing with unions. We're dealing with various entities, whether it be a city or a service, but we are intending to take it all the way into a federal court. And excuse me, there's quite a few groups who are doing similar things, and I think that really the answer to this is to calmly and specifically bring different matters before a court, and then hold the courts accountable to actually act under their proper jurisdiction. And so that's what we're intending to do. We're intending to go to court with this. We're intending to bring the people who are doing this wrongly, who have been duly notified that they're doing it wrongly. They've been given copious amounts of proper warning and just calm, direct notification that this is why it's wrong. These are the sections of the Criminal Code, of the Nuremberg Code, of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, of the Constitution of Canada that are being breached here. And so that's where you can go to find us, frontlinealliancenb.ca. We've got a GoFundMe as well. And, pardon me. We've put quite a bit of our own money into it. Each person who's a part of that organization has put quite a bit of their own money into it, and we're just hoping to kind of have a little bit of a war chest in order to take on the powers that be. So.
Well, you've without specifically addressing it, you've actually given people out here a lot to think about and to be encouraged by. I saw some questions in here. What can we do to stop it? What can we do to stop it? What can we do to stop it? Well, this is exactly what we can do to stop it. This is what we're starting to be able to bring to the public is stories like yours, groups like yours, organizations like yours, and to let the people know out there, there are lots, there are more. There are organizations like yourselves with very talented, very committed people that are taking this to task. And these are the things that we need to be more involved in supporting as a community. This is where change is going to happen. Doing things, people's sense of urgency is not necessarily indicative to just the time frame of a solution. The wheels of justice move slowly. We live in a world that moves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have to strike a balance and understanding between realistic expectations and our own sense of urgency. And I know that's incredibly difficult. That's one of the things as an officer and a firefighter you have to manage in the moment of that split moment. But most people don't have that capability, so we're seeing a lot of that. So without really highlighting or specifically, giving them instructions, supporting organizations like yours, supporting independent, active, true journalists, communities, getting involved in a community outside of your echo chamber, getting involved in supporting litigation and organizations that are delivering meat and potatoes. These are incredibly encouraging things. So I thank you so much today, James, for coming on and sharing a bit of your story and leaving us with hope, not just rage and anger, because that would be so easy to do. Final thoughts for the community out there tonight?
You know what? I just actually noticed that there's this comment section, and I hadn't been looking at it. I might have been able to answer a couple more questions, but I've just really appreciated the opportunity here, Wayne, and I think that's the final thing that I've got in my mind is just like you've said, we're all in this together, but not in the way that we keep being told we're all in this together. We're people who we're very resilient. My son and I in 2017 went to Vimy Ridge for the 100th anniversary, and my grandfather was wounded there, and I've always heard sort of the theory that that's where Canada started is on those hills, with young farm boys deciding to go off to fight something that they believed in, right? And I think that I really hope that we're not in a situation where we're going to be through a meat grinder like World War I was, and I don't think that that's the type of war that we're in right now. I think we're in a war of endurance. I think we're here trying not to allow our spirits to be crushed by sort of this psychological warfare. And if I could leave your viewers with anything, it's that despite the fact that I've walked away from a career that I thought I would be at for at least another 15 years, and despite the fact that I know that there's people all over the place who are losing their jobs, I have hope for my kids, and I have hope for the future, and I intend to do whatever I can to make sure that that the seeds that I'm sowing are going to be able to be reaped by future generations. And so, I think if we were all to act that way, we'd be a lot further ahead. When
this nonsense person started, I identified early on that the way we were going to get through this was getting back to our humanity and remembering
Yes.
people first, because I could see it then already. And insanity is unsustainable, and humanity is who we truly are. So regardless of this war of attrition, this political war of attrition, which is really what it is, there is no such thing at this point as going back to normal. I think we passed that. The new normal that they have envisioned for us, I don't think is acceptable to us. So for us and our team, we look at how do we build a better tomorrow together. And it's gentlemen like yourself that give me every bit of faith that we're going to get there. So thank you so much, James, and you inspire me, and I hope we get a chance to do this again soon. I'm sure we'll be talking in other avenues and arenas and discussions. We're not going anywhere. We are in this doing what's right, not what's easy, and I appreciate you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Wayne. Appreciate
My
being
pleasure,
here.
James. We'll talk again soon.
All the best.
All right, guys, that was an honor and a pleasure, and I'm going to not go on too much longer, except for to tell everybody on Sunday we have got a roundtable discussion with Honorable Brian Packford and Kathy Jones from This Hour Has 22 Minutes. So Sunday at, I believe, noon Mountain Time. Hold on to your hats. That's going to be a good one. And look for more of these next week. I've been speaking with a former RCMP sniper, Corporal Daniel Bulford, and we're just lining up a chance for him to come in and talk. And then we're going to have our old friend, ex-CIA Station Chief Brad Johnson, come back on and give us a comparison update. So you guys know me. When they start to censor my stuff and tell me they don't like it, I get that much more inclined to go and find a whole bunch more to talk about exactly that. So look forward to this Law and Disorder series carrying on a little bit longer, and we'll see what we can shake out of the woods. So stay strong, guys. Stay safe, and together we can make Canada again.